Russian offensive towards Kharkiv collapsed. Currently, there's some serious battle in the area of Vovchansk. We know that Russians use a lot of their aviation, striking the area with gliding bombs. But other than that, they lost quite a lot of their personnel and their vehicles there. Of course, they can hire more personnel. They recruit approximately 30,000 men on a monthly basis. But again, we are talking about modern warfare, and modern warfare is impossible without machines. And this is something that Russians are struggling with at this point.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. And this time we are joined by operator Starsky, a Ukrainian military veteran, a YouTuber and co-founder of the Propaganda Study Institute. Operator Starsky, great to see you again. Thank you so much for your time. Let's look at the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine to start with. Russia has been attacking across 11 fronts, with the heaviest fighting in the Donbass region, but with heavy losses, heavy tank losses. Ukraine is involved in active defence, and it's reported to have drawn on munitions that have previously been marked to be disposed of. How long do you think this can continue for this situation?
Well, we will continue fighting for as long as we have enough supplies, because the only way for Ukraine to return our land back and to remove the invaders is stable military and financial supply, of course. And this is what we are getting, especially members of NATO were talking about it during the recent summit. So we are looking forward to receive more supplies and continue receiving those supplies. But of course, one of the reasons we cannot fight as effective as we can is that we're not allowed to strike Russian air bases, for example, located further from the front lines on the Russian territory. And in Ukraine, for example, it raises eyebrows because there are people in Ukraine who truly believe that this way our allies are they're protecting our enemies better than they protect, children in the clinic of Ohmandit for some reason. We need to be able to strike deeper into the Russian territory, and I think as soon as we have this opportunity, as soon as we have this capability, the tide will change.
And that is a point that President Zelensky, exactly that point, has made at the European Political Community Summit in the UK today. I'll ask you a bit more about that later. But what can you tell? He's also said that the Russian push towards Kharkiv has also been halted. Is that how you understand the situation? What is going on there with the Russian incursion there?
I would say that this was obvious maybe already a month ago when Russian offensive towards Kharkiv collapsed. Currently, there's some serious battle in the area of Vovchansk. We know that Russians use a lot of their aviation, striking the area with gliding bombs. But other than that, they lost quite a lot of their personnel and their vehicles there. Of course, they can hire more personnel. They recruit approximately 30,000 men on a monthly basis. But again, we are talking about modern warfare, and modern warfare is impossible without machines. And this is something that Russians are struggling with at this point.
What about the weather? I mean, it's very hot at the moment in Ukraine, isn't it? How is that affecting the battlefield?
It's really, really hot, and especially on the front line, it's very hard. People don't fight wearing t-shirts in the real life. You should always wear uniform with long sleeves, in order not to expose yourselves, and this makes it very, very hard. So our guys, they, in my eyes, they were always heroes, but this weather makes them even bigger heroes than before.
Members of the Ukrainian army have told of witnessing cases of captured, injured Russian soldiers along the front line being sent back to the front line with having suffered already debilitating injuries. Some horrific details have been reported. Have you heard those kind of stories at all?
Not only I've heard those stories, but also there's plenty of footage from the front lines showing Russians self-annihilating. Basically, we're talking about wounded Russians that commit suicide because they understand that they will not be evacuated. They are left behind, and we can see more and more such videos every single day. Basically, monitoring channels in Telegram are full of those. They're very easy to find everywhere. Um, Russian medical support, let's say, is in very, very bad shape. And of course, Russian traditional agenda of using their soldiers as cannon fodder, again, it's very, very obvious and very well known for, I would say, centuries, maybe.
Ukraine, according to the Institute for the Study of War, has continued targeting Russian air defense systems in occupied Ukraine and in Russia's border areas to prepare for the conditions to field F-16 fighter jets for their arrival late summer, maybe autumn. How long do you think it might take Ukraine to cause enough damage to those defences so they can safeguard the F-16s for combat operations?
It only depends, and I would say it directly depends on how many long-range drones, how many long-range weapons we can produce here in Ukraine, and how many of those we are being delivered by our allies, because those are the things that help us to destroy Russian air defense. But currently, we can see that Russian air defense is suffering big losses. For example, I believe it was in Belgorod or Rostov, there was obituary obituary on a bunch of Russian soldiers published in the Russian media, where they admitted that together with those guys, they already lost two battalion commanders in the same unit. So their losses are huge, and we can also see this from the fact that their oil refineries keep burning, keep being destroyed. So it depends on the territory, it depends on the specific area, and of course, it depends on the weaponry that we have.
And in the wider political sphere, Ukraine and Europe are now seriously considering Trump 2.0. Arguably, his presidency has been sealed by this assassination attempt on him. And J.D. Vance, potentially the next American vice president. How nervous is Ukraine about this, given that he is a skeptic who's spoken out against continuous funding for Ukraine and for direct US negotiations with Moscow to end the war?
There are different opinions regarding this, of course, specifically in Ukraine. But in my personal opinion, we should keep hoping for best. And regarding Mr. Trump and regarding J.D. Vance, you know, from what I saw, they often change their opinions if some of their brilliant ideas stop working. One good example is Nikki Haley, for example. She was a big Ukrainian supporter, um, uh, promoting Trump's presidency, of course, and in her many different speeches, she often supported Ukraine. She basically always supported Ukraine. She talked about the U.S. and Ukraine mostly, right? And since the beginning of this year, she stopped doing that when apparently she realized that she loses some of her audience by talking about Ukraine. And we are talking about the audience that is more susceptible to Russian propaganda and more susceptible to different conspiracies and things like that. So, um, same with Donald Trump. I believe that as soon as he becomes president, he will realize that his idea of finishing the war in 24 hours is basically nonsense, because he cannot blackmail Ukrainians and he cannot blackmail Russians either. This is real life. So we will see. Same basically with with JD Vance, who despised Trump publicly in the beginning, but quickly changed his mind when he realized that the tides changed again. So we're talking about politics, and things change in politics every single day.
Of course, the former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has had a meeting with Donald Trump where he will have been talking up the reasons to continue supporting Ukraine. And you talked just there about how the American public may have been susceptible to propaganda by Russia. If you had a hand in pushing the propaganda in Ukraine's favour, what would be the message you'd be sending?
The thing is, we don't use propaganda.
Okay, well,
Propaganda
if you
is
were trying to increase the messaging, sorry to if you want to get the information across and correct that propaganda, what would you be doing?
So first of all, we have to eliminate the ways this propaganda is shared and spread around society, because we don't have to fight against freedom of speech. We have to fight against terrorists who abuse freedom of speech. And we can see a lot of them, unfortunately, still active in YouTube, in social media, mostly in Twitter, of course, for obvious reasons. So we have to fight against them, against their ways of delivering those informational viruses to the society, because. Unfortunately, due to the Russian efforts, instead of solving problems, we still discuss whether facts are facts, whether they're true or not. And this is exactly what Russia wants, because while we're still discussing whether Russians are bad or not, Russia keeps waging its informational and hybrid warfare in European countries, in the United States, using AI powered fake accounts, thousands of fake accounts, to deliver their messages. And this is a problem.
How much confidence is there in Europe being able to and willing to support Ukraine, should it have to do so one day without the US? Because Germany, for example, is planning to halve its aid budget to halve its aid to Ukraine next year to 4 billion euros.
Well, I believe that one way or another, no matter what conservative Americans, for example, talk about isolationism, they realize that it's impossible in the modern era. It's nonsense, and they will realize basically that supporting Russia and playing with terrorists may actually result in being completely isolated, and this is a big risk for everybody, for any civilized country. The peace summit that took place in Switzerland was a big success, because there's a lot of countries that signed under the resolution of this peace summit. And I believe this is the reason why the next summit is planned to take place before a presidential election in the United States, because Russia will be invited. Russia, of course, will not reply to this invitation. They will refuse it for obvious reasons, because they will not accept the conditions that are supported by Ukraine and by hundreds of countries of the world. As soon as this second peace summit takes place, and as soon as its results are published, I believe next American president will have to react to this, because instead of developing some kind of solution for Ukraine to stop the war, um, he will already have the ready solution, the solution that was prepared at the peace summit. So I think this is very important, and next president, whoever he will be, will have to take it into account.
And of the 60 billion of US aid that's been approved by Congress, how much of that has arrived, and how crucial could it be if Trump becomes president?
We are talking not about money, but rather about the equipment and vehicles that are being delivered to Ukraine, because one of the biggest myths used by Russians, again, in the American internet, using bots, is that there's literally airplanes just flying over Ukraine and parachuting money to Ukrainian people. We keep receiving the supplies. Of course, we don't talk specifically about what we receive here or there, because for OPSEC reasons, right?
And just to refer back to the kind of political situation we were talking about a moment ago, in your role as co-founder of the Propaganda Study Institute, what kind of advantage or evidence have you seen of the Russian Federation trying to capitalize on the political developments in the US?
One of the recent evidence was the report published by the U.S. Justice. Do they have department or ministry? Ministry of Department, yeah. The recent evidence was the report published by the Justice Department of the United States. It was a report on one of the biggest boat farms being closed during the operation conducted by joint efforts of the United States and Netherlands. It was a boat farm that was operated through Russian software called Meliorator, and this software basically allows to create fake accounts that are completely automated. They are AI powered, and they are trained. They use generative model that is trained on Russian narratives, trained to spread those narratives and repost pro-Russian publications. And majority of those bots were speaking on behalf of the US citizens. Of course, the narratives, you probably know them all already. We all heard them. It's tax money and yada yada. But this is just one of the examples, and it was a fresh operation. It was conducted, I believe, just about a couple of weeks ago.
That's fascinating. In Russia itself, there are some interesting articles that have been published after an interview that was given by Russia Security Council Deputy Chairperson, where in response to the outgoing NATO Secretary General's comments that NATO will become a member in the next 10 years, Dmitry Medvedev said it never will, because in 10 years NATO leadership will have changed and the country will likely not exist. How are those comments being used in Russia, in the Russian Federation itself, to try and influence public opinion and shape it?
Recently, they started publishing a lot about this summit and about NATO in general, and I think is part of their agenda, because we see that Medvedev and different Russian news agencies like ITAR-TASS, they work together spreading those narratives. I believe on ITAR-TASS last week they published an article where they completely perverted what Mr. Stoltenberg said about Ukraine's membership, basically saying that Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. Uh, which raises a question: why then did the war start? Because again, one of the biggest narratives that is shared by the Russian propaganda is that the war started because of NATO expansion. Uh, Ukraine could not become a member of NATO neither in 2010 nor in 2014, 15, 2020, for a simple reason. There's a statute of NATO, and in this statute, it's said clearly that a country that has an ongoing war or ongoing conflict cannot become a member of NATO. And everybody who at least a bit interested in NATO and politics and history know about it. So Ukraine could not become a NATO member, and frankly speaking, even though we have and we always had a very very close partnership, collaboration with NATO, with our Western allies, but we were never promised membership. We were never invited directly to become members. I don't remember a single case when that would happen, which on one hand, it's of course it's very bad for us. On the other hand, even if Ukraine is granted membership like tomorrow, it doesn't change anything, because officially, again, Ukraine will not become NATO member until there are Russian invaders on our territory. And at the same time, this is something that completely destroys Russian narratives about invading Ukraine to protect from, against being invaded by evil Ukrainians, NATO members.
And doesn't it also obliterate any concept that Russia would consider some kind of peace anytime soon?
Unfortunately, yes, and we know that Russia will only stop this war when they have no capability to continue attacking, when they realize that they will not reach their military targets. And in best case, of course, when Russian invaders are removed from the Ukrainian territory and the borders are restored. So recently, there were numerous reports about Russians building new launch stations, unified launch platforms for missiles like Onyx, like Caliber, and those platforms basically can be installed anywhere, like on the ground, on the ships, which tells that Russia is not planning peaceful resolution. And the only reason this happens is because they realize that they have chance. So I think one of the ways to make them less active, in their war efforts, is to show clear support for Ukraine. One of the things that was very, very important during the NATO summit was that Russia was designated as a primary threat for the NATO countries for the first times, because previously the strategy was a bit different. Previously, it was based on a belief that Russia may become democratic. Now the world realized that it's impossible, and Russia was clearly designated as a main threat for NATO. And on the next summit that will take place in The Hague, there will be developed a new strategy regarding what to do with them. So I think from this standpoint, it's very helpful for Ukraine as well.
And also from that NATO summit was this declaration that Ukraine was on this irreversible path towards NATO membership. Overall, when you take a step back with a few days between that and now, do you feel encouraged by the summit?
We don't really like to play, oh my God, in Ukrainian language, we have this word zrada, which basically means betrayal. We don't really like to play betrayal, and we don't really like to celebrate, to be overly optimistic regarding this. We are more pragmatic regarding the summit because, again, Ukraine was promised absolutely pragmatic things like military support, like financial support, and from this standpoint, it's good. It's nothing that we should like be really happy about, but it's something good, something positive for Ukraine, of course.
President Zelensky has now been attending the European Political Community Summit in the UK, as we said earlier, and the Hungarian leader, Viktor Orban, was also there. And pointedly, President Zelensky said Putin cannot sustain relationships with truly strong leaders, and he urged for unity among European allies and to resist blackmail. It's being interpreted this as a swipe at Viktor Orban's recent self-styled peace tour, which was not sanctioned by the EU without their permission. I mean, do you think that President Zelensky there is sort of preparing, he's on a preemptive strike, if you like, against any credibilities for arguments that might grow, or support that might grow to push for any peace talks that would be favorable to Moscow?
Regarding President Zelensky's commentary, I think it was good. I admit it was good.
Did it make you laugh, did it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is true, of course, and from what we see today, closest Russian allies, I believe Russian citizens would never dream about it, to have closest allies among countries like Iran, North Korea. But I don't really think that people like Orban, European politicians who grew up in Europe, in this society, in the civilized democratic world, I don't think that they feel really good about sharing the same audience with such people.
And just to return to the idea or the subject of disinformation and Russian disinformation, how do you think we, as in allies of Ukraine, West and the West, can propaganda proof ourselves? And how do you spot it? What do you have to do?
It's a really hard question because in order to answer this question, institutions were created, right? First of all, we have to educate ourselves and we have to check information, which is already a big failure because people usually don't do that. We are information consumers, we're not fact checkers. And it's up to us whether we want to change it or not. But generally, we have to check the sources where this information comes from. We have to understand also one very important thing. Of course, when people talk about, and it's basically people's opinion, right, that media on the West are lying and media on the East in Russia are lying. They must understand one very important thing. When Western media are speaking, right, they don't necessarily want their citizens, their European or American citizens, to die, which is generally Russians' main objective, because in Russia, information is a combat weapon, and Russian misinformation, Russian propaganda is basically a combat tool used to kill people, to destabilize countries, and to conduct informational terrorism, which leads to actual losses. And this is a very, very small but very important difference between Western media and Russian media. Russian media want you to die. That's all.
And in your work at the moment, what is occupying your mind? What are you most focused on? What are you most interested in?
So first of all, we are interested in understanding how Russian propaganda works, how it is created, how it is implemented, because Russian departments in KGB, they created misinformation for the Western countries for decades. And there are different steps implemented by Russian informational specialists. Currently, of course, we're not only talking about FSB, we're talking about Russian external intelligence service. We're talking about numerous Russian communication strategic agencies that support Russian war against Ukraine and against the democratic West. We are interested in understanding how it works, in exposing this to the public, because this is one of the ways to destroy propaganda, to make sure that it stops bringing harm to people. It's basically exposing this and showing this to people, how it works. And one thing that I personally dream about is to help the governments, help Western countries, European countries, to create some kind of legal solution to fight propaganda. Because again, when we're talking about fighting propaganda, we also don't want to harm people's freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and it's a very, very important topic.
Plenty of work to be getting on with. Operator Starsky, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. My thanks to our producers today, Louis Sykes and Morgan Burdick, and for you for watching. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe now, or you can listen to Times Radio for the latest news and in-depth analysis, or go to thetimes.co.uk. For now, though, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.